Mark here. I just got back from Kentucky and I wanted to post this video quickly before I go back to Kentucky. Went to Peerless Distillery this last visit, and it's a small distillery just east of Louisville downtown. It's in Louisville in this old historic building. And I met with Caleb, their head distiller. Now, the great thing here is Peerless Distillery only bottles at cask strength, and they only do single barrel and small batch products. Their rye has won a ton of awards, and I wanted to see their operation. And I gotta say, I was really impressed. They do a sweet mash instead of a sour mash. They, like I said, barrel everything at a lower proof point. And Caleb runs you through the whole whiskey making process. And because it's a smaller distillery, still not small, but it is a smaller distillery, you can see everything within the few rooms. So here's Caleb showing the whiskey making process within Peerless Distillery.
Hello, my name is Caleb Kilburn, and I'm the head distiller for Kentucky Peerless Distilling Company, and I get to talk to you a little bit about cooking. So the process is going to start with milling our grains on the far side of the elevator house here. We're going to pull the grains out of 50 bushel seed totes that we're then going to process through a flow scale that's going to get us to the pound accurate measurements on its way to a 6-head roller mill. At that point, it's going to be carried through and conveyed through this chain and disc system, and it's going to enter the cooker on the grain entry chute that's marked by that white pipe coming down. At that point, it's going to enter and join Kentucky limestone water, and we're going to meter in our corn and our rye first. At this point, we're going to heat it up to 100. We're going to begin throttling steam back at around 190 degrees, but we're going to hold it above 200 degrees for 15 minutes. At that point, it's going to convert a lot of the tightly bound starches. It's going to begin to unwind those. At that point, we're going to cool the batch to 145 degrees and add in malted barley. Malted barley is going to provide the naturally occurring enzyme alpha amylase to the batch, which is going to break down those starches into sugars. We're going to hold it here for 30 minutes for this conversion step, and then we're going to cool it on down to around 100 degrees for us to pitch our yeast. At this point, it's ready to be transferred to one of our 6 1,800-gallon fermenters. At this point, we're going to allow the sugars that we've created to be ate by the yeast that are going to convert those into carbon dioxide and alcohol. The alcohol part we want. The CO2 bubbles over the side and is dissipated into the atmosphere. So we're going to control it in these batches by use of cooling coils. Now what's going to happen here is we're going to set how fast we want the yeast to ferment in the batch. If we have a warmer temperature, they're going to work a little quicker. If we have a cooler temperature, they're going to slow down. And the reason we will kind of set their pace, we want the batch to finish up right as we're getting ready to distill it. If it finishes too soon, it's a contamination hazard. If it finishes too late, we've left some alcohol on the table because that's unconverted sugar. So that's really the start of the process, and we have to be extraordinarily sanitary in our conditions here because we're doing what's called a sweet mash. Sweet mash as opposed to sour mash. Traditionally, when someone would do a sour mash, they would reuse a portion of a previous batch, whether it be the active yeast cultures or whether it be a portion of stillage, which is the waste product from the distilling process. What they'll do is they'll use this to help start the next and help go ahead and get it a little bit of a head start. Downside is it's very similar like sourdough bread, where it has that distinctive gritty taste. And then when you distill it, you kind of have to distill that out of the product. Instead, what we do is we focus on having extremely sanitary conditions on the front end. We go ahead and we pay the extra utility bills, but it creates a very sweet, very floral, very nice beer that then I can distill at a very low proof, pulling in a ton of grain character and a ton of fermentation character. Let's talk distillation. So the beer is going to enter the room through the single copper pipe in the upper right-hand corner of the room, flow through a preheater which chugs the ceiling, and then it enters the column on the third flange down on the upper left-hand side. At that point, the beer is going to spill into what's called a sieve tray, which is a shallow copper pan with perforations on the bottom and a spillway on the far side. So what's going to happen, the beer is going to flow in, it's actually going to flow across those perforations and then flow through that spillway. And this process is going to repeat itself all the way down the column, zigzagging its way back and forth. Meanwhile, what's happening is I'm injecting live steam into the bottom of the column that's blowing up through each of these trays through those perforations in the bottom. And as it does this, that steam vapor, which starts at the bottom as pure water, is going to exchange some of that water for alcohol. And as it moves up through the column, it's going to gain more and more alcohol concentration until it's roughly 120 proof at the top of the column. From there, the alcohol is going to go around to the condenser on the right side of the still, where it's going to go back from a vapor into a liquid. At that point, it's going to flow to this right spirit safe, the low wine safe. At this point it's good, but it really needs one more distillation to bring it up to our flavor and quality standards. So from there it's going to go around to the doubler, which is a small pot still you see there, where it's going to be boiled off at a consistent rate, temperature, and flavor profile, all of which, all the conditions have to be slightly tweaked every day. We're constantly dealing with different beers, different weather. Throughout the day, we're going to continually be making adjustments to this to make sure that the product quality will be consistent. So from here, it's going to boil off at around 130 proof. It's going to go up through the condenser on the left side of the still, again from a vapor into a liquid, and it's going to come around to here as a high wine. Now this is where myself or one of my other two distillers will be sampling this at least every 30 minutes, which equates to roughly the beginning, middle, and end of every single barrel. We are a small distillery. We aren't churning out several thousand a day. Our average distillation only produces 10 to 12 barrels, and that's actually utilizing 2 fermenters. So we're collecting this, and in addition to that quality control test, we're actually going to go through and make notes on every single temperature, pressure, pump output, everything that's going on in the system. That way we can constantly evaluate what's going on. The other thing we're going to be looking at is the weather. We constantly check the weather every 30 minutes. That way, rather than having a disturbance or something happen that we have to play catch up to, we try to be proactive to make sure that we know exactly what's getting ready to happen, further enhancing the consistency of our product. So over the course of the day, we're going to collect those 10 to 12 barrels in this tank, and then we're going to transfer it to a tank on the other side of the wall to get it ready for barreling. And I'm going to talk a little bit about something that makes us really, really special, our barrel entry proof. So following the distillation, in this tank I'm going to have 10 to 12 barrels worth of alcohol. And we're going to transfer it over here to our gauging tank to do all of our federal reporting. Uncle Sam really likes to make sure that I pay my proper tax dollar, and that's something that we're completely compliant with. At this point, we're going to get it ready to go into the barrel though. And this is where we're doing something really special. To be a bourbon or a rye, you have to go in the barrel below 125 proof. A lot of distilleries make the very business-wise decision of storing near this maximum for a simple reason. If you add any water to proof it down any further, what's going to happen is you're going to expand the volume of that whiskey. And when you expand that volume, that means you have to buy more barrels, more warehousing, more shipping, more labor. There's a lot of costs associated with having more physical containers. So they store it concentrated, and at the end of maturation, they're going to add water to it to get it to a very palatable proof. So the typical norm is to go from 125 proof, which is a generous number because typically it'll creep up beyond that. But let's say it's 125. They proof that down to an 80 proof product on average. That's usually what they'll go for. So when you add that much water at the end of maturation, 36% of the volume of that final bottle is water. Water didn't touch these barrels, didn't touch the still, didn't touch the process. And so what's happening is as you've worked so hard to create all this flavor, at the end they'll go ahead and dilute it, which doesn't set well with us from a quality perspective. So instead what we're doing is we're going into the barrel at a very palatable 107 proof, where it does add a little bit of water on the front end. It costs us 17% more on all those expenses that I talked about. But what's going to happen is that water is going to have the benefit of aging with the whiskey, pulling out caramels and vanillas and flavors from the oak. Then at the end of maturation, what I'm going to do is in the tank behind me, I'm going to mingle together on average 6 barrels. That is our standard small batch. So I'm going to take those 6 barrels, mingle them together. I'm going to process it, and by that I mean all I'm doing is getting the proof, the weight, that way I can record my losses, and then we're going to leave it as is. I'm going to do a 1-pass filtration removing the char, but we're not adding any water. All the flavor that we worked so hard to create will stay pristine in the product, undiluted. And we're currently standing in our on-site warehouse. So the reason I'm here is I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our single barrel program, which is going to be 1 barrel at a time, featuring some really unique notes from around the flavor wheel, as opposed to our small batch, which is going to be a mingling of 6 barrels or fewer on average. And when I do this, we have to come into the warehouse and select some really unique barrels to pull those together to create some really unique flavoring notes. This is going to be done by sending some people into the warehouse with a drill and a bottle, and they're going to come up and they're going to tap a barrel. They're going to pull me a sample, and we're going to go through and we're going to grade and assign an identity to that. Once I have enough barrels of enough different identities, I'm going to put them together as if it were a puzzle to come together and make a really fun, interesting batch.